Cells comprise all living beings, including the plants and animals that we end up consuming. While small, cells often have big jobs. Just like you and me, in order to function, cells require energy. In order to obtain this energy, many cells utilize the processes of aerobic or anaerobic cellular respiration. However, some environments do not allow for the use of either of these mechanisms. This is where fermentation comes into play. While fermentation is not a process that directly creates energy, it prepares molecules within the cell to ensure that other cellular processes that do produce energy, specifically glycolysis, can occur. The process of fermentation affects your daily life more than you would think. Fermentation is utilized extensively in the food industry to produce many of the products that you may eat on a daily basis. Why would we use such a complex process to create food? Fermentation can be used to preserve food by limiting the growth of pathogenic microorganisms. It can also be used to enhance the nutritional content of food and creates desirable flavors and textures. There are three main types of fermentation that are most often used in the food industry: lactic acid fermentation, acetic acid fermentation, and ethyl alcohol fermentation. While all of these processes are types of fermentation, they each have their own unique aspects that define different characteristics of the process and the products produced from it. Lactic acid fermentation plays out with the help of bacteria such as Lactobacillus bulgarius and Streptococcus thermophilus. Many lactic acid fermenting bacteria are gram-positive and do not require oxygen in order to ferment. Lactic acid fermentation itself occurs when these bacteria convert pyruvate, which is produced by glycolysis, into a lactic acid byproduct. The buildup of lactic acid produced throughout this process raises the acidity of the cellular environment, lowering the pH to a point where other pathogenic organisms can no longer grow. Here are some key foods that are made utilizing lactic acid fermentation. Let's take a look at a specific food production process that utilizes lactic acid fermentation. Yogurt is a popular option that uses this process. To begin, yogurt mix is pasteurized at a temperature of 95 degrees Celsius for about a minute, and then cooled to 45 degrees Celsius. The mix is then pumped into a vat and inoculated with Streptococcus thermophilus and Lactobacillus bulgarius. After this process, the inoculate mix is filled into cups, sealed, and allowed to incubate in a warm room. Once the yogurt reaches the appropriate pH of about 4.5, the cups are transferred to a refrigerated storage space until they are sent out for shipping. Similar to yogurt, lactic acid fermentation is associated with its creamy texture and tangy taste. Acetic acid fermentation is the oxidizing of ethanol to acetic acid. In contrast to lactic acid fermentation, it uses gram-negative organisms, specifically of the genera Acetobacter. Additionally, unlike lactic acid fermentation, these organisms do tend to work in oxygenated environments during fermentation reactions. Here are some key foods that are made utilizing acetic acid fermentation. Let's take a closer look at a specific food product that is made using this process. Kombucha is a great example of acetic acid fermentation. To make kombucha, we first start by boiling water, sugar, and tea leaves. Once filtered and cooled to room temperature, the acetic acid culture is added. The mixture is incubated for 2 weeks at 20 degrees Celsius. The beverage is filtered and stored in capped bottles. Similar to kombucha, acetic acid is associated with a strong vinegar taste. Ethyl alcohol fermentation is similar to lactic acid fermentation in the fact that it begins with molecules of pyruvic acid. A carboxyl group is removed from pyruvic acid, which is created from glycolysis. This releases carbon dioxide as a gas and creates the carbonation that we taste in some of our favorite beverages. However, this process can be anaerobic or aerobic, unlike acetic acid fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, which require specific environments. Additionally, fermentation of pyruvic acid by yeast produces ethanol found in alcoholic beverages and in the field of biotechnology, in which it acts as a key energy source. Let's look at a specific food production process that involves ethyl alcohol fermentation. Beer is one of the most widely known products that utilizes ethyl alcohol fermentation. The first step of brewing is malting, where barley is germinated at low temperatures. These low temperatures break down the starch in the malted barley into sugars. The malt is then milled to a grist, mashed with hot water, and brought to a boil. Hops and spices are added to improve the taste and promote antibacterial activity. Gram-positive bacteria are inhibited, which contrasts from lactic acid fermentation, which utilizes gram-positive bacteria. The mixture is filtered and yeast is added to begin the fermentation process. The beer matures as it is stored at low temperatures for several weeks. As seen in our example, ethyl alcohol fermentation is most often associated with its bubbly flavors and a strong bitter taste. While we reviewed what makes each of the three main types of fermentation processes special, we can't neglect the ways in which they share many general characteristics. At the end of the day, these processes all, in their own way, reduce the presence of spoilage microorganisms, utilize living organisms to catalyze chemical reactions, and create very delicious products.